Welcome back, everyone. Just a broad sense of what the agreement, in principle, with no guarantees, is for how the evening is going to roll out. Because
I do love a political arrangement with many caveats.
we like everyone to feel the enthusiasm and excitement of not knowing what's happening next. We will, as I say, in broad principle, spend another hour-ish on finance. Then we will go to the Future Fund Management Agency, again for approximately an hour, and then we will finish up with Services Australia, and we will all finish at 11 p.m. sharp. So let's get right to it. Senator Sharma. Oh, Senator Collins.
will have the call.
Lovely.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I'd like to ask about the Port of Darwin, please.
Okay, I'll just get... I thought I might need to get other people in. Just...
Yeah, I think it'll be entertaining.
Yeah, no, I just needed to get 20.
When you're ready, Senator.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Minister, when did you or the department most recently engage in formal negotiations with Landbridge about the lease of the Port of Darwin?
Senator, the Department of Finance, the portfolio responsible for leading work in relation to the Port of Darwin is the Infrastructure Department, so the Department of Finance hasn't had any engagement.
Sure. But am I correct in saying that the Department of Finance would negotiate on the contracts?
No, Senator. I mean, I can't really... I'd have to take on notice, in a sense, where things are up to, but we're not involved in any negotiations at this stage, Senator.
Does Finance have any advice on the contract that the Port of Darwin lease is under?
Does Finance have any advice? Finance will work with, as we do on a lot of transaction-related issues, we'll work with the relevant line portfolio and give them advice, but the lead is coming through the infrastructure portfolio.
So I just want to put it into context that there was an election promise made to end the lease of Landbridge. If those negotiations fail for somebody to come in and buy Landbridge, what's your advice on how to end the lease of that contract? Have you given advice to the government on that?
Senator, I can't. As I've said previously, in a sense, lead for this issue is coming out of the infrastructure portfolio, but I'm not in a position to comment on what sort of advice we might or might not have provided to the government.
Minister, do you have any advice? Have you been given any advice on the contract for the lease for Port of Darwin?
I think the Prime Minister and the government has made clear our position in terms of progressing that. That's a matter that would need to be addressed to the Infrastructure Department.
Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Are you finished, Senator Collins?
Just one final question.
Sorry, didn't want to be pushing.
Yeah. I just want to press a little further on the advice that was given. Has there been any updated security or foreign investment advice since the election about the lease of the port? I mean, it's an ongoing issue. I understand that Finance, as you said, would enter into contracts. So, has there been any advice on that would be given?
Senator, I'm not in a position to give you to sort of reflect or comment on what advice might or might not have been given to government, and would say, and I'm not saying this just to be difficult at all or trying to be difficult, it is the lead for the implementation of this election commitment is coming through the infrastructure portfolio, so a lead on advising government in relation to it is most likely to come through that portfolio.
Okay, but you would be able to give advice on breaking the lease of the contract?
Well,
I mean, the contract
sorry, I don't understand
It's
that.
a hypothetical,
Yeah.
I think, there,
No,
Senator.
but would that be in your remit? That's what I'm asking. That particular part of the process would be in Finance Department remit?
I don't think it's as sort of. I don't think it can be as black and white as that, Senator. To be honest, the questions associated with what we might or might not do with respect to a lease. I wouldn't want to speculate on who's likely to lead giving advice to government on that. What I would say, as I said earlier, is the Department of Finance will, through the commercial part of finance, will certainly be assisting. The agency or agencies that are working on this issue.
And we haven't given any briefings on that so far?
As I say, I'm just not going to
assistance
comment
on
on what sort of advice we might or might not have provided, Senator.
All right, thank you for your time.
Certainly. Follow up, Senator
So
Sharma.
do you mind if I just follow up briefly, Mr Windier? If the government was to buy the Port of Darwin, would finance be the owner, or would it be a government business entity? I just would have thought this is a...
Again, to be honest, Senator, it's a bit of a hypothetical. There are there'd be a number of possible ways, I guess, that it could be owned. So I can't. That will be a set of decisions. If that question arises, then we'll have to turn our minds to what the sort of appropriate structure or arrangement should be at that point in time. So I can't really offer a view. I'm sorry.
And has finance provided any advice to the minister on how you would structure a transaction like that, or what the owning?
Just take these things on notice.
Senator, I really just don't want to get drawn at this stage, given the nature of this and us not being the lead on it, drawn into commenting on what advice might or might not have been provided to the minister.
Could you take that on notice?
I'm happy to take that on notice and see what we can provide.
Okay. As I understand it, so the process is, and if you can't comment, I understand, but the process is to find a commercial buyer, or in the absence of a commercial buyer, for that lease for the government to acquire it?
Well, we are not... These aren't questions for this portfolio, and it's obviously matters that the Infrastructure Department will deal with, or could deal with, is responsible for, I should say. They're the lead agency, so we'll be taking further questions on notice.
Is there a timetable for this process?
We'll be taking further questions on notice.
Thank you, Chair.
Senator Pocock.
Thanks for returning after dinner. I wanted to go to the Supplier Code of Conduct, which you mentioned, Mr Windier, in relation, you said it was one of the things that's been put in place recently in response to the PwC and other Big Four matters. It's been in effect now for over a year, I think. Its goal is to set expectations for government suppliers on, quote, ethical behaviour, corporate governance, business practices and health and safety and employee welfare. How many breaches of the Supplier Code of Conduct have been reported to date?
Senator, I'm not sure. I'll see if Mr Danks has anything to add.
We're not aware of any to date, but there's no requirement for agencies to report those breaches to finance unless it relates to a finance panel.
So the Supplier Code of Conduct will be relevant in a sense in all supplier contract relationships with government, not necessarily therefore something that is notified to finance.
So if there is a breach of the Code of Conduct, then you have no register, no information, no department or agency is required to tell you of the breach?
Not across the board, Senator. As Mr Danks said, we would know with respect to breaches related to suppliers coming off one of our panel arrangements.
So you only
so it's a subset of the total.
in relation to the panels. So someone is on the what was the panel that EY is no longer on? The
MAS panel.
MAS panel.
Yep.
Sorry. If PwC or KPMG is removed, or any consulting firm is removed, from the MAS panel, you know about it. Do you tell, what's the communication around that?
Well, Senator, so certainly if someone is, if, for example, a firm was suspended from or removed from the MAS panel, which would be something that finance would be leading on, then that would be communicated out across government through our the sort of normal communications channels we have across the sort of government procurement network, as it were.
Okay.
The question, and similarly, we would be, you know, and we use those communication channels to communicate a range of matters across the sort of family of Commonwealth agencies that use the panels. I think your point, the point about the Supplier Code of Conduct is a breach or a concern with the Supplier Code of Conduct might not be, might occur or be raised before. It might be unrelated to whether someone's suspended from the panel. The question would be if something was raised. And as Mr Dank says, at the moment we have not had any breaches flagged with us with respect to suppliers on the panel.
And if I can just add to my previous answer, Senator, Senate Order 23F, which is one of the things coming out of the inquiry that you're involved in, Senator, requires the biannual tabling of reports for consultancies over $2 million.
Sorry, yeah, that's about reporting.
But one of the requirements for reporting is whether any of those contracts that are reported have any notifications under the Supplier Code of Conduct. But it only is restricted to consultancies over $2 million. So it's a subset that we'd have visibility of.
So that is a bill, it's not legislation.
No, this is a Senate order that was passed last year.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I'd forgotten it was Senate order. I was thinking of Senator Colbeck's bill. This is separate, yeah. Okay, so that order will make clear, will it, if anyone with a contract over $2 million has breached the Supplier Code of Conduct?
Any consultancy contract over $2 million. So the first tabling of that report was done 23 January this year, and the second tabling was in 22 July. And both of those tablings, there was no reported conflict, no reported notifications under the code. No
reported notifications. If there is a notification reported, what is the penalty? Is there a sliding scale of penalties? Is there no penalties? What's the story?
There's a process that we go through for potential breach of Supplier Code of Conduct. So the first phase is to identify and assess the severity of the incident. The second phase is initial action. So we'll request additional information. We could watch and monitor and reassess if necessary. We could issue a warning. The most likely pathway is to request a remediation plan on the issue that was being breached. As part of that remediation plan considerations, we can consider restricting or suspending a supplier during that remediation process. We would then contact entities that have active contracts or request for quotes for that supplier. And we do reserve the right to terminate from the panel for severe incidents. Phase 3 is to review the remediation plan and determine next course of action. And then there's an ongoing communication process with the supplier and with entities to explain what happened through the incident and any follow-up to ensure adherence and compliance to that remediation plan. And the sequence of behaviours or events that you've just gone through apply to anyone who is over $2 million size of contract, whether it was secured through the panel or by independent means directly to a department or agency. So the process I just discussed are for breaches against the MAS panel or people panel, so the arrangements that finance manages. So if a consultancy is granted by another means, what's the process there if there's a breach? We have shared this process with other entities for them to consider whether they would want to adopt this as part of their remediation processes. So it's voluntary, agency by agency? This process is, but the Supplier Code of Conduct isn't. It's mandatory. So let's go to a specific contract. The DEWA contract of $440,000 paid to Deloitte for a report, and I quote, littered with errors, including 3 non-existent academic references and a made-up quote from the federal court judgment, extremely expensive, automated incompetence. Expectation 1.2 of the code states that suppliers must, quote, act honestly, responsibly, transparently, consistently and hold themselves accountable for their actions.
Further expectation 2.1 of the code states that suppliers must not engage in any activities that are illegal, unsafe, exploitative, fraudulent, corrupt, collusive or otherwise unethical. Do you consider this behaviour to be unethical?
Senator, to be honest, I think at this point, from what I have seen, and we aren't party to, it's not a contract with us. I'm not sure I would describe it as unethical. I think it is it's obviously very unsatisfactory performance of a contract for DUA, and there has been a consequence, in a sense, using the contractual mechanism with respect to what they have ultimately been paid. But based on what we have seen at this point, I haven't seen it as unethical.
You don't think this behaviour breaches the Supplier Code of Conduct?
Senator, I'd have to take that on notice. I don't know enough about it and haven't done a sort of an assessment to work that one through.
Let me just talk through what I understand the events to be. The firm has used AI. It hasn't notified at any point in the report that it gave to government that it was using AI. It has since corrected that. It has used a fictional quote from a federal court judge in support of its argument. It's corrected its references. I think it's amended 12 references underpinning the argument in its report, and it has failed to publicly apologise or make a public statement about what it's done. I consider that bundle of errors to be unethical, in my view, and it was paid $440,000, as we understand, is now offering to pay back its final cheque. You don't find that a troubling set of events? Because I really do, and I know a lot of people out there, I can show you my email box, are extremely concerned about that.
Senator, I agree it is troubling. What I'm saying is I'm not sure at this point, based on what we have seen, I would have described it as unethical. I'm certainly not. I certainly agree with you. It is definitely troubling. As I understand it, but would need to, we would need to happy to take on notice and consider the question about a breach of the Supplier Code of Conduct in more detail. But for example, as I understand it, the intention to use AI as part of the contract, as part of the work, was known to, disclosed and agreed with
You've
DUA,
had conversations with DUA about this contract?
No, I haven't. That's why I'm saying I haven't got as much. I haven't got all the detail. But that's from what I understand to this point. I have heard that been led to believe that there was an understanding that AI might be used. But this is
who
what
gave
we
you
need
that understanding, Mr. Winnier?
I've received that information.
We have had discussions with DUA,
okay.
and DUA indicated that there were discussions about the use of AI. It may have gone further than what was agreed initially, but there were certainly discussions around AI being used to generate part of the report.
I'll come back to
but
that.
This is why. I suppose that's why I'm saying we would need to.
Has Finance been notified of a breach of the Code of Conduct by anyone, by a DUA, or had any contact from Deloitte in relation to this contract?
We on 2nd of September, Deloitte wrote to us to notify us. On the 2nd of September, Deloitte wrote to us to advise that this issue had occurred and suspected errors had been identified, and that as part of their remediation, that the Deloitte engagement team have received training on the responsible AI use, including confidentiality, data handling and output review. They then sent a subsequent letter on the 12th of September 2025 clarifying the discussions that they've had with DUA in relation to where the errors come from. But I think, as Mr. Windy indicated, our colleagues in DUA are more across the detail about the particular errors and issues within the report, and I think they are quite prepared and ready tomorrow to answer questions.
Thank you. I will pursue that, of course. You are the government's custodian of procurement. What was your advice to DUA when they came to talk to you about this situation, when you had discussions with DUA?
Senator, I personally, I haven't had the direct discussions with Dewar, so I don't want to speak for my colleagues. But
Okay.
the observation I would make is, I think, we weren't engaged with Dewar. We were notified by the supplier of the issue. We weren't engaged with Dewar on how they were handling. There were elements of this which were for them to handle as the contracting party, but I'll let the colleagues comment on.
And can I just
what
say, as you
advice
go
we
to
might
answer this, could you table or provide on notice the two pieces of correspondence and your reply? Did you make reply to either of those letters?
Not in writing. There were meetings with Deloitte to discuss.
Could we have details of those meetings as well?
We'll take that on notice.
And any email correspondence?
There has been discussions with Dewar, so Mr Bradley has been talking to Dewar colleagues. I spoke to a colleague as well around on and about early September about the issue. So there have been discussions that we've been having with Dewar. But as Mr Windier said, they're the contracting party. We're obviously responsible for the panel, and we were concerned when we first found out about this, which is why we did seek more information from Deloitte. I think some of these.
You sought more information from Deloitte.
We did. The team did have a meeting with Deloitte to understand what happened and the circumstances behind it.
And are you, Mr. Bradley? Thank you.
Rob Bradley, Assistant Secretary of the Commercial Group. I wasn't part of the initial meeting, but we did. I haven't been a part of the meetings directly with Deloitte, but I have had discussions with Dewar about the process that it's
With Dewar?
Yes.
But not with Deloitte. Why not? They've reached out to you.
I wasn't part of the initial meeting, and I was actually the person, I believe the gentleman that was acting in my place took part in the second meeting. I was on sick leave there for a couple of weeks, unfortunately.
If it would help, Senator, in addition to what we can do in terms of taking on notice the correspondence, we're happy to take on notice and give you just a sense of the meetings and when they occurred and the meetings we've had.
I can see that there is a really good argument for pursuing this with Dewar, but you're the agency that has oversight, and everyone is watching this. You can bet the Big Four are watching you carefully, and they're hearing you say it's troubling, but it's not unethical.
Well,
that really troubles me.
I'm saying that on the basis of what I know at this point, Senator.
And what will you do to find out more about?
Well, I think we can and we'll sort of be able to pursue this as with both the supplier and working with Dewar too to understand what how it looks from their perspective. And that's work we will undertake in due course.
What's the payment? Yeah, what's the payment that Deloitte have foregone in their final payment?
I'd have to take that.
I'd like to add the number. So the final payment was $97,587.11, and we understand that Deloitte repaid that money today.
They've repaid that money today, so
That was the advice from
that's a
Dewar.
25% of their 440,000 roundabout, a bit less.
Give or take, yeah.
20. Have you given any thought to appropriate advice to Dewar about the size of or the nature of penalty or remediation that is appropriate in a circumstance like this?
We didn't in this circumstance. They formed their judgment that withholding the final payment was appropriate remediation for this issue, and we're happy to support that Dewar's position on that.
I'm going to come back to this, but last question. Do you have rules related to the use of AI across the service? Are you developing them? Do they exist at present?
Rules for... there are a whole of government policies, largely a policy owned by the DTA with respect to use of AI in government.
Internally by public servants?
Yes, that's correct.
We talked about that earlier today.
Yeah, so that's probably the guiding piece for public servants. And then with respect to how we have looked at and are considering handling use of AI through the procurement space, I'll let Mr Danks comment on that.
So we are in the process of updating all the heads of agreement and requests for quotes for both the mass panel and people panel to make it clear that if a service provider wishes to use any sort of generative artificial intelligence, they need to disclose that as part of the request for quote process and to get explicit consent from the entity of that use. That clause is already in the people panel phase 1 head agreement request for quote, and as the other arrangements get refreshed, that clause in quote.
What proportion of consulting is captured by the MAS and the people panel?
So all consulting across Commonwealth and all labour hire arrangements that are non-ICT are captured by the MAS and people panels.
Okay. so I'll come back to this. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
And thanks for your
Senator
answers.
Sharma.
Thanks to you, Chair. I had a question about the recovery of a grant that was advanced to Fortescue for a green hydrogen project. Is that within Finance's domain, that recovery of the grant? I believe the relevant Minister Ayres has said that the funds would be recovered.
What's the entity?
Fortescue or Fortescue?
Fortescue.
Fortescue.
I think
It's
it'd
a
be
grant
the
from
Department
the, I
of
think it's a
Industry.
grant from the industry.
Yeah.
It wasn't so it's not a finance.
No.
Is it a contract with Fortescue by that department?
I think it was a
Yeah,
grant
it'd have to be
It was
advance.
a grant, yeah, so I think the Department of Industry would be able to answer what the process would be for recouping that grant.
So they would be responsible for
Yes.
recouping that grant, not the Department of
Yeah.
Finance. All right, thank you. Could I just turn topics then to public service levels,
Yes.
APS levels? So I understand in the PBO's June 2025 election commitments report, they took the view, the PBO that is, took the view that the PFO released by the government on the 7th of April 2025 implies a cut of 22,500 public servants over the forward estimates, including 16,000 in the 26-27 financial year. I understand when this was discussed at the last estimates, though, Finance disputed that PBO modelling, so I guess I just wanted to understand.
So, Senator, it's probably less around disputing, it's just the PBO uses a methodology that the PBO would need to be able to explain to you about how they derive. So they had originally derived a figure prior to the election at the request of Senator Hume, and that was what was discussed at a previous estimates hearing.
Right.
We do understand that the election costing done by the PBO in the 2025 election used the same methodology, but I'd have to refer any sort of questions on their methodology to the PBO.
Okay, so you don't. I mean, it's not built into the government's modelling, the changes to the size of the APS that the PBO refers to in there.
What do you mean built into the government's modelling?
Well, I guess. So,
No, I'm not trying to be
No, sorry.
difficult.
Just to put my question.
What's the import?
Put my question directly and simply. Is it the government's policy to retain the size of the APS except for minor fluctuations, and is that what's built into the forward estimates in the budget?
So the government has made some commitments around the future of the public service, but in terms of what's actually in the budget books, in terms of the estimates, and that relates to essentially what is the wages and salary expenses. And those figures, which are in Budget Paper 1, page 271, Statement 9, they are the aggregation of departments' assessments of what of their departmental expenses they will spend on wages and salaries. So at Finance, we aggregate those figures that each department provides us, and that is their best estimation of what their wages and salaries expenses will be going forward. Now, obviously, there are things that will vary that as you get closer to the year in which that estimation has been made, depending, obviously, we index departmental expenses, and there's obviously which obviously increases, and then there will always be terminating measures. So you get a series of ons and offs. So what is in the budget books as the estimates of future expenses is in fact advice provided by each individual department, which we aggregate.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that includes wage increases, I mean, that have been negotiated already, I guess?
So I think we have discussed this previously at estimates. Those expenses don't include and never have historically the actual wage increases agreed through a bargaining process. But we do index departmental expenses. by wage cost indexes, which take into account both increases in wages, general increases in the WPI, and also CPI. So that is built in already into the...
An increase in
yes.
accordance with the wage price index? Or,
yes.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, so the assumptions that are built into the budget at the moment of the size of the APS will be roughly maintained, and wage increases.
So that is a commitment of the government.
Yeah.
What is in the budget books is at this point the estimation of departments or accountable authorities of how much of their departmental expenses they will spend on wages and expenses, and we would expect those figures to move around as we get closer to the actual year.
Okay. Has Finance had any discussions with the PBO about their modelling, or how they reached that conclusion?
I haven't, Senator.
Senator, we haven't had specific discussions about that methodology, no. What the PBO will do as part of its methodology is seek information from finance that underpins the budget estimates, and we will provide that information, but the methodology, as Ms Patterson said, is a matter for the PBO.
Okay. So I guess I should direct any questions to them in terms of why they expect a cut in the public service?
Yes.
Yes.
So it's a slightly rhetorical question.
Yes. I'll answer it anyway. Yes.
All right. Thank you, Chair. There's nothing further from me.
Thank you. Senator Collins, do you have anything further? No. Senator Pocock.
I was asking about whether firms should be obliged to say when and how they use AI. I can tell you they're out there tonight. They're all going public about what they're doing. They're all squeaky clean. They're going to have huge protocols. Be able to paper the walls with all the things they're going to do about AI, because they really don't like what they've seen publicly around Deloitte. The only reason we know about Deloitte here tonight is because of journalists, the AFR. Where is your responsibility as the custodians of our system to be surfacing these appalling outcomes? $440,000, 4.5 years of a public servant's wage, and this kind of behaviour, which would be unacceptable to me as a lecturer for a first-year student in an essay. How can you possibly not declare... And I come to you, Minister. Are you comfortable with that? Because that is unethical.
Well, no, of course I'm not comfortable with it. I think it's embarrassing for them, and I don't think it's... I think it's concerning. So I don't think I'm not here to defend them.
So there is a code of conduct for these suppliers. How is it to be applied in a way which is meaningful? This is not the first offence. We've got a report tonight of KPMG, a $60,000 contract, nothing compared to Deloitte. But what did they do? They wrote a 60-page report which reviewed the integrity of overseas research systems. $1,000 a page. It is appalling. It is bad value for money, and they've cheated on their references. I mean, sorry, taxpayers, but this is not the first offence. These guys do shoddy work that's poor value for money, and they cheat and lie on their way through it, and none of them have come clean voluntarily. So I'd like to know, Minister, what you're going to do about it.
Well, I think, as I said at the outset, Senator, the government has taken very strong action in relation to previous... I was going to use the word misconduct, but I can't recall what the phrases were used in relation to the previous PwC.
Misuse of confidential government information to make money out of it. Appalling.
I just trying to remember how it was described, which was right, and I think it was. I think that was as demonstrably unethical. And the Treasurer and the Finance Minister have previously announced changes to the framework, changes as a consequence of that. I think this article, I became aware of the earlier this week of the use of AI and the incorrect footnotes, and I just saw the article that you were referencing, which also shows a phantom reference by KPMG, and I think it is it isn't the sort of standard that taxpayers or the government expect. So of course we will look at it, and of course we will we will engage, no doubt, with them and also take advice from this department and apply our own judgment about what is the best way to deal with it. I'm not going to sit here and defend them, Senator. So
No,
that's not.
That is a relief.
Well, I don't think anybody has actually.
No,
I think Mr. Wendow, he has a, you know, he responded, and I probably should have intervened because you asked him his opinion, which wasn't really fair, to be honest. But, you know, for public servants, the words unethical have a particular connotation and meaning, right? So that does, I don't think, he's not defending, no one is defending what's occurred. I think it's a question of how you deal with it. And we will look at it.
I understand that, but not defending them is a very low bar in the face of such appalling behaviour. I think these are a group of players who still find the government procurement and consulting very profitable, and they wait and wait and wait for the Senate to lose attention, to get worn out by it, and then they return. And I think what we're asking for is, I personally believe, this behaviour will only change if there's significant monetary penalty where proven behaviour of an unethical kind has occurred, and I believe that's happened here. Will you look to penalties which are more? This is 22% foregone revenue for Deloitte in the case of this contract. Many Australians will find that a very unsatisfactory penalty on such a sizable contract. Will you look at financial penalties that are commensurate with the nature of the misdemeanour?
Look, we're concerned with the reports and we'll look closely at it.
And the big four firms and others are tonight out there declaring themselves to have exemplary and develop exemplary policy around AI. Will you require that? You said it just before I lost questioning.
Well, demonstrably that isn't the case, that is demonstrably exemplary. I mean, I think if the newspaper report is to be taken at face value, I think demonstrably those assertions are problematic.
They're saying they're going off to develop them, or they already have them.
I thought you
Deloitte
said,
is not saying
sorry,
that.
I
Deloitte
thought you
clearly
said they already have them, and I was saying,
No.
well, if the reports are to believe, demonstrably they aren't exemplary, are they?
There is a report just now done by at Financial Review, will be in tomorrow's paper, where they are declaring that they have such a policies. Not Deloitte, it's clear there is a problem there, but a number of the big four and larger consulting firms are declaring that they will have this under control. But I think we need some control and management, do we not, from the side of the government and the department that's in charge of the quality.
Well,
of
I think there's a procurement issue, a question about procurement. I understand that's been interesting. There's a question more generally, which I know Senator Gallagher and I think Minister Ayres and the Cabinet Secretary are engaged on, which is how governments deal with artificial intelligence. More generally, like I think this is a subset of a much bigger policy challenge, frankly. So yes, I appreciate your position in terms of much tighter procurement arrangements, but I think the sorts of issues that this raises really goes to a much deeper issue.
I agree, but this subset, we have clear material that we need issues and behaviours now that require us to be on the alert. So thank you for taking my questions on that and for coming back to me on notice with answers as you've agreed. Can I move on to another element of procurement? Under the PGPA Act, Section 22 of the Act, the Minister may issue a government policy order to mandate that a specific policy of the Australian Government can be applied to one or more Commonwealth entities. I've got that right, have I?
Sorry.
What was the question? Anna Harmer, Deputy Secretary, Governance and Resource Management. I don't have a copy of the PGPA in front of me, but certainly if that's what you have read it to say, I believe that to be correct.
So to mandate that a specific policy of the Australian Government be applied to one or more Commonwealth entities. Has the Finance Minister exercised these powers to put in place any domestic financial safeguards to prevent the possibility that any government expenditure has been deployed to contribute to any form of armaments in use by the Israel government? Has there been any safeguard developed in that respect?
We'll take that on notice.
Great, thank you. It's my understanding that the Department of Defence recently signed a $9.7 million contract with Elbit Systems for radios. This is the same Elbit Systems that is Israel's largest arms manufacturer that mass produces drones that the IDF uses to kill Palestinian civilians and whose drone killed Australian aid worker Zomi Frankham in 2024. Our Department of Defence is contracting with a company whose products are responsible for the killing of an Australian. Minister, is it acceptable to you that Elbit is being awarded government contracts?
This is a matter for the Department of Defence, Senator.
My preamble to this question was saying that the Minister has the power to issue a mandate in relation to an area of government policy and spending. So I'm just asking...
We'll take that on notice, but my recollection is that the PGPA Act would not be applicable to the circumstances that you're referencing. But look, let us take that
Thank
on
you,
notice.
that's great. I understand the devolved framework, but I'm testing whether that capability exists at the at your department level.
Only because, look, this is a long time, but I'd worked on the PGPA Act when we in 2013, but this primarily applies to entities, not departments of state, from memory.
Perhaps what I could do is on notice provide an outline of the intended operation of that provision. I believe it is intended to allow the application of certain frameworks to various Commonwealth entities to ensure that particular entities may be captured within frameworks that, for example, might normally apply to departments. But I wouldn't want to mislead you.
Yep.
If I may take that on notice, we'll provide an outline of the intended operation of that section and the context in which it's typically used.
And if the scope exists for the kind of request I'm making. Thanks for your answers and thanks for your help. That's it from me.
We have nothing further, Chair.
Well, thank you so much to everyone from the Department of Finance. Really.
I won't say I'm going to miss you.
But we'll miss you.
You won't. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Minister Wong. Thank you, Mr. Yiannopoulos. I hope you've thoroughly enjoyed your first estimates. We all look forward to seeing you again in December.
Good luck for day 9.
Good luck at day 9. And we will just suspend while we change up our ministerial representation and departments. Thank you. Welcome back. We will now move to the Future Fund Management Agency, and I would welcome Dr. Arndt, Chief Executive Officer, and the other officers of the Management Agency. I would also welcome the Honourable Minister Farrell joining us for the rest of the evening. Minister Farrell, would you care to make any opening statement?
Look, thank you for the opportunity, Chair, but on this occasion I shall decline the opportunity.
Thank you. Would you care to make an opening statement, Dr. Arndt?
I would, thank you. Since the establishment of the Future Fund in 2006, investment returns have now added $192 billion to its value. The Future Fund is delivering against its long-term investment mandate with a 10-year return of 8% per annum, exceeding the target return of 6.9% per annum. Over the past financial year, the Future Fund delivered an investment return of 12.2%, which was double its mandated target. These returns reflect the benefit of the thinking we've done since 2021 around the new investment order, which considered major themes including deglobalisation, populism, geostrategic competition and technological advances and their impact on investment markets. We have made and continue to make changes to the portfolio as these themes develop. We've increased the level of structural risk in the portfolio to improve long-term real returns. We've also continued to develop the resilience of the portfolio to a range of scenarios by increasing and diversifying our exposure to developed market currencies and commodities. Many of these changes added to portfolio returns during the year, contributing to the $32.8 billion of total returns generated across the 7 funds managed by the Board. The Future Fund's investment returns were also achieved while making significant investments in the national priority areas of infrastructure, housing and the energy transition, consistent with the Future Fund's revised investment mandate. The total value of the Future Fund has now exceeded $250 billion for the first time. The value of the 6 other funds managed by the Future Fund Board of Guardians increased to $66 billion after providing almost $4 billion of distributions towards their intended programs. Total funds managed by the Future Fund Board of Guardians are now over $318 billion. I welcome your question.
Thank you very much. Senator Sharma, would you care to start?
Yes, I'm very happy to. Thank you. Good evening, Dr. Arndt and colleagues. Hello, Senator Farrell. Just had a question about managing potential conflicts of interest within the Future Fund. A Future Fund, and please forgive me, I'm new to this arrangement, so these might be quite simple questions. Future Fund governors or senior staff, are they permitted to hold personal shareholdings and investments? And if so, how is that disclosed and managed within the context of their employment?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the Future Fund actually sets out quite a rigid regime around managing conflicts of interest, which we of course apply. The board itself, so the Future Fund Board of Guardians, is part-time, so there's no restriction on owning investments, and similarly for the staff there's no restriction on investing, but there is a process around which people, certainly senior decision-making people, which includes the board and the senior staff and all the senior investment staff, need to disclose material holdings so that they can be managed, and then the board and the rest of the staff also would have to disclose any other conflicts that they might have. So in the case of the board, where it's a part-time job, most of them hold other directorships in other organisations, and so those would be disclosed too.
Okay. So when you say material holdings, what is there a definition of material or a threshold?
It's essentially something that is likely or could be perceived to be likely to influence the decision-making around it.
So like $1,000, $10,000, $100,000?
Well, we leave it to the person to make that disclosure. It's ultimately their responsibility, but to the extent that it is considered to be material, we would follow up and ask what it is.
Okay, and so the Future Fund, what then maintains a register of these holdings of the board and the senior staff?
We maintain a register, and then every time there's a decision-making committee meeting, whoever's at or on the committee, whether it be a staff committee or the board, also need to disclose, having seen the agenda, whether there are any conflicts that they need to declare and therefore recuse themselves from.
I see, okay. And do they also need to, I guess, then do they have to update the register periodically or after a transaction, anything they do that's...
Well, we would formally update the register at least once a year, but the onus is on everyone in any meeting to disclose if there's a conflict. And I should say also, in respect of listed companies, we don't directly invest in listed companies, so we very rarely have inside information, but some of our private market managers do from time to time get involved in transactions with listed companies, for example, buying a business off them or taking them private. And so if we were to come into possession of private sensitive information, we actually maintain a register of companies where people aren't allowed to trade. So if any of the board or any of the staff want to trade a listed security, they need to put it through a compliance process where we can check that we don't have any inside information, and if we do, then that not receive approval to trade that security.
So that's for any public company or those that you keep on your register?
Well, for any trade in a public company, they would have to go through that process, and then the system would come back and tell them whether that company was or wasn't allowed to be traded.
I see, okay. So what, again, sorry for the simple questions, but I didn't realise the Future Fund didn't, so you don't have much holdings in publicly listed companies?
No, we do, but we invest in them via fund managers, so we don't have a trading desk. Right. We don't make decisions about individual companies ourselves.
I see, okay. And how are conflicts, is there a conflicts committee of the board, or what's the sort of internal governance mechanism for this?
Well, so for the staff, I mean, either staff or the board can have conflict. So for the staff, that would be managed through the management hierarchy, and ultimately to me as the CEO.
Right.
For the board, previously there was a conflicts committee of the board. It actually hadn't met for more than 3 years, and so earlier this year the board went through a process of rationalising its committees, because there's a lot of paperwork and filing associated with committees, and decided to collapse that committee and pass the responsibilities back to the board as a whole. And so the chair ultimately can manage that process, and then there's a process if the chair was to declare a conflict, the chair of the Risk and Audit Committee is responsible.
Okay, okay. And do you maintain any, have there been incidents where conflicts of interest have arisen, and do you keep a register of those incidents?
We do. So the board, not quite, I wouldn't say regularly, but from time to time we would look at transactions where someone on the board would declare a conflict, either because they sit on a different board and that the company that they sit on might be competing for a transaction or something like that. And so we would remove information on that particular transaction or company from their board pack, and they would step out of the meeting.
So they'd recuse themselves from that part of the meeting. Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that explanation, Dr. Arndt. That was all I had at this stage. If you wanted
Senator
to...
Collins, do you have anything?
Thank you, Chair.
Senator Pocock.
Thank you, Chair. And just to follow up that line of questioning, and thanks everyone for being here. Just curious about your turnover in your Guardian membership. What do you have a principle you follow about length of tenure, and what's your practice? What's the practice on the board?
Look, the Guardians are appointed by the government, not by us. So, but the process is set out in the legislation, and the maximum term's 5 years. But it's up to the ministers at the time of the appointment to set that out.
Sorry?
It's up to the ministers at the time of the appointment to set the term.
So what would be the average tenure, would you say, of your current Guardians?
Well, I think they've all been appointed for 5 years, and they're at various states of their tenure. They tend to be staggered, so I believe we have 2 Guardians whose terms will conclude during 2026, their first terms, and then it's up to the government, I guess, whether they get reappointed or someone else gets reappointed. And we have, the chair obviously started just over a year ago, and there's 1 Guardian who started a few months ago.
And how many Guardians are there? What's the membership?
7.
7. How many of them are women? I'm sorry, it's probably on a website somewhere. I should know.
I believe it's 5, but
5 of the 7 are women.
Yeah.
Oh, well done. You mentioned that you largely invest in listed companies by means of a fund. Do you provide publicly the proportion or an accounting of the fees paid to fund managers to deal with the administration for their advisory functions and so on?
We report the fees, yes, we do. So we report the fees, the investment manager fees I think you're referring to,
yep.
In the annual report. And there's sort of 2 levels of fees disclosed. It's a little complex in our industry. There are fees we pay directly, and so they're disclosed in the annual report and the financial statements. And then there are fees that are paid indirectly because we invest into a fund and the fund manager will take the fees out of the assets of the fund. And so that's a more resource-intensive process to work that out. We actually have to go and ask, because we invest in fund of funds, sometimes we go into a fund, that fund goes into other underlying funds, and so we have to go and gather that information, and so we do that once per year and report that in the annual report.
And do you benchmark your investment fees against other large entities?
So at the fund manager level, so each individual investment that we make, we certainly do, and we keep a database of typical fees in the industry. At the aggregated level, so the whole of fund level, if that's your question,
yeah.
We perform we take an investment approach which is net returns, so returns net of all fees, and the investment style that we practice leans heavily on manager skill. So that's things like hedge funds and private equity funds and active equity funds. And so they tend to be higher fee strategies than many other investment strategies that other similar funds would take. And we strongly believe, and the board believes, that that leads to better net investment return outcomes. So our fees would appear to be quite a lot higher than typical in the industry, but our returns are commensurate with that.
And your view is that they're managing higher risk assets that require more management? Is that what you're saying?
Well, the way we think about fees is we're never happy, but we will reluctantly pay fees for manager skill that adds to return, but we don't want to pay fees for vanilla jobs or just investing in the index. And so, for example, when we buy equity index strategies, we would pay very low fees.
Mm-hmm.
We would negotiate very low fees. But when we buy very skillful strategies, for example, some of the hedge funds, venture capital, private equity funds, we actually analyse the net returns and look at the value that the fund manager adds over and above the index return, because they should be able to get the index return without skill, and then make sure that we're retaining a reasonable share of the outperformance. In the industry, the jargon is the alpha of the return, and that we would like to keep at least half of that.
And do you pay, how does a bonus system function?
For the managers?
For the investment managers, yes.
I guess that would typically be called performance fees for equity managers, and for private equity managers that invest private market funds, it's typically called carry.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a little different depending on the asset class we invest in. For private equity managers, typically the manager would buy assets, hold them in the fund, and then sell them after typically a period of 5 to 7 years. And over about 10 to 12 years, they would liquidate the fund. And we would start to pay them a share of the return above a threshold. Usually it's an 8% per annum return.
Mm-hmm.
So they might keep 10 to 20% of the returns above that 8%. For hedge funds, it's usually a return maybe around 10% above some benchmark rate, like the cash rate or the bond rate or something like that. And that's a more liquid strategy that can be assessed every year, rolling. And then for the lower skill strategies like equities I was referring to, we typically would not pay performance fees for that.
And what's the turnover like amongst your investors, your managers?
how often do we fire or hire managers?
You've got a very settled group that are there year after year, or what's happening?
I think they're pretty settled, but we're always adding and taking away. We typically hire maybe something less than half a dozen new fund managers a year and fire 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm. Why do you fire them?
A range of reasons. So it might be that they are underperforming, and we lose conviction in them, or they lose key people, or it might be that they're doing fine, but we just think their strategy isn't the best strategy to go into in the current market or for our portfolio. So there are a range of reasons.
So setting aside your investment managers, are staff in the fund on bonuses as well?
Yes, so we have a variable pay scheme, if that's what you mean.
Yep.
And it's very typical in our industry that investment professionals would have a base salary and then a variable component linked to the investment performance of the funds that they're investing. And so in order to attract and retain skilled investment people, we need to follow that same approach.
How many staff are there in your core future fund direct employee group?
Approximately 3. I think it's about 340.
340. And are those base salaries and bonuses published in your annual report?
Yes.
By individual?
So
or
for
level of classification?
Yeah, so for the key management personnel, they're all published by individual, and for the rest of the staff, they're aggregated into bands.
Okay, and it's total remuneration, everything in the package?
Yes.
Thank you. Very interesting. I wanted to go to a category of investments that you make in the fund, the question of investment in weapons companies, including those that a UN report names as profiting from illegal occupation, apartheid and genocide in Palestine. I'm no doubt you're familiar with a report from Deep Cut News, an article titled Future Fund's Investment in Israeli Arms Firm Skyrockets. Do you have memory of or knowledge of that? Does it ring a bell?
I haven't seen that report, but
okay.
We've talked about this investment before, Senator.
We have, but this is more recent information. We have, thank you. I and many Australians are very concerned. In fact, there was a poll last weekend which said something like more than half, 53% of Australians would think we should disengage from any trade at all with Israel. But I'm very worried about our sovereign wealth fund investing and contributing potentially to breaches of international law, quite apart from the ethics of investment in weapons. That article references public investment data showing that in December of 2023, the Future Fund held a combined $74.7 million in 3 companies identified in this UN report: Elbit Systems, Lockheed Martin and Palantir. By December 2024, that figure had jumped to over 122 million. Was Elbit not previously blacklisted by the Future Fund?
Senator Will Heatherton, Chief Corporate Affairs Officer, Future Fund Management Agency. What I might do is, in respect of Elbit Systems, Elbit was for a period of time excluded from the portfolio. I think from 2018 through to 2023, and it then became investable back into the portfolio. And if I may, I'll just explain the framework and the process we have around that. So, as an investor, we look to build a broadly diversified portfolio across asset classes and geographies, and we want to make sure that we maintain as much diversification in the portfolio to generate returns and to manage risk. The board at the same time recognises that it needs a policy to consider issues where companies may need to be excluded from the portfolio, and really there are a number of ways in which we can think about this and which we've talked about before. The first is that the board ensures and requires its managers to apply applicable sanctions, and most particularly the US sanction regime and the Australian sanction regime. So if an entity is sanctioned, then it can't be invested in, and that's a requirement on all of our managers.
Sanctioned by who? Just sorry to interrupt.
Sorry, sanctioned under the US regime and the Australian sanctions regime. The second limb to this, if you like, is the board's exclusions policy. The board excludes some stocks from the portfolio based on involvement with controversial weapons related to conventions and treaties that the Australian government has ratified. And that includes, for example, cluster munitions, anti-personnel mines, chemical and biological weapons. Those exclusions are applied across the portfolio. They are updated twice a year, drawing on input from expert analysts to help us understand which companies may fall foul of those conventions and treaties ratified by Australia. And that list is then published on our website. It's communicated to our managers such that they are required not to invest in those stocks. You mentioned Elbit, and I think this is relevant here, is that Elbit Systems, through a transaction that it did with another organisation, another company, in 2018, was identified through our process as becoming exposed to the production of, I think, cluster munitions, although it may be landmines, but becoming exposed to that activity, and on that basis was excluded from the portfolio. Through our process of regular due diligence review and testing, as I mentioned, every 6 months, in 2023 it was identified that Elbit Systems was no longer involved in the activities that led it to be taken out of the portfolio, and so it became investable once again. As we mentioned before in earlier questions, actual investment decisions are taken by our external investment managers. So if there's no sanction arrangement prohibiting an investment, if it's not prohibited through our exclusions process, then it's over to our managers to assess whether they wish to make an investment in line with their strategy in a particular company. And that's occurred, and so through that process, Elbit came back into the portfolio from, I think, May 2023.
So you have one or more investment managers who are choosing to put investments into Elbit Systems.
I think,
and the others I mentioned.
I think in those, particularly in developed markets, where our approach is largely an approach of buying the index, so that the mandate we give to our investment managers is to gain exposure to a whole index. They're not so much picking stocks as looking at the index and building a portfolio that matches that. So if something's not excluded, it's in the index and becomes investable, they can bring it back into the portfolio.
Isn't it also the case, however, that you have other exclusions, for example, tobacco, I can't remember, gambling? There are categories of investment that you exclude from your portfolio. Isn't that the case also, alongside the exclusions you've mentioned?
The board, at the time in 2013, chose to exclude tobacco from the portfolio, given the particular characteristics of that product.
Kills people.
And that there's no safe level of use. So the board elected to apply an exclusion in relation to tobacco in 2013. That's the only other exclusion outside.
So you have investments in gambling?
Yes, we do.
Can you tell me what proportion of your investment, or what a dollar figure is of your investment in gambling related investments?
No, I can't. I would have to take that on notice.
Could you take that on notice?
And I'd also note that there's a full list of our investments available on our website.
Thank you, but if you could take that on notice, so that anything gambling related, it's often difficult to actually find your way to those actual products looking at our website listings. You haven't, however, addressed my question, I think, which is, you've told the story, thank you, of why Elbit was excluded, and it was especially, it seems, in relation to its transactions around cluster bombs. Is that correct?
Cluster bombs or landmines. I forget right now.
Okay.
Sorry, it was cluster munitions.
Cluster munitions. And just on that, are you confident Elbit have no association, no business in relation to cluster bombs, anti-personnel, or the third category you mentioned, chemical or biological weapons?
That's the advice of our expert researchers on that topic. We use 2 researchers. They provide us with their analysis. And for a company that has been excluded to be reintroduced into the portfolio, we require both advisors, both research businesses, to confirm that they both agree that it's eligible to come back into the portfolio.
So you believe, or the leadership of the Future Fund believe, that the guardians, the board, that the assurance you have in relation to specific forms of weapons, those 3 kinds of weapons, mean that it's okay to be back in investing into Elbit? Make sure I understand you correctly.
Yes, so we believe, based on the research that we have, that there's, under our policy, under the board's policy, there's no reason to exclude the company on the basis of conventions and treaties the Australian government has ratified.
This is the same Elbit Systems that is Israel's largest arms manufacturer, that mass produces drones that the IDF uses, clearly engaged in killing Palestinians, what is now reliably called by many, including international experts, into genocide, the genocide underway, and whose drone, Elbit's drone, killed the Australian aid worker Zomi Frankham in 2024. Minister, if I can come to you, how comfortable are you with that investment strategy, which includes very sizable and rapidly growing millions of dollars invested in something which has killed an Australian and is engaged in assisting Israel in its genocide?
Look, I do think it's unusual on a day that marks 2 years since 1,200 Israeli citizens were massacred.
Terrible. I agree.
By Hamas. Women were raped, murdered and abducted. I think it's unusual that you should focus on just one aspect of that terrible conflict. And of course, the view of the Australian government is that whatever we can do to assist in the peace process, that's exactly what we should be doing, including, if we can achieve peace in the Middle East, particularly between Israel and Gaza, of course, there's no need for weapons on either side of that conflict. But look, the Future Fund invests independently from government, and we do not and cannot legally direct the Future Fund as to where it invests particular assets or particular businesses. The legislative framework also requires the Future Fund Board to maximise returns over the long term, consistent with international best practice for institutional investments. The board has built a broad, diversified investment portfolio across thousands of listed entities, and these investments are made through more than 100 external investments. The Future Fund invests in accordance with relevant laws, including applicable sanctions, regulations and legislative mandates. Investment managers acting on the board's behalf are expected to comply with these requirements, and I think the previous witness indicated that that's what they do. The Future Fund Board investment exclusions centre on economic activities that are banned under our treaties and conventions that are ratified by the Australian government. The board and the Future Fund management agencies have robust processes in place to ensure that these exclusions are applied appropriately, and again I think the witness went through that process. I would note, consistent with again the evidence of the former witness, the exclusions relate to cluster munitions, anti-personnel mines, nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, biological weapons, and as previously been reported, the Future Fund made a decision of its own bat to not invest in tobacco companies.
If I can come back to your range of comments there, Minister, I feel I must address the aspersion you cast about me asking questions about events in Gaza and Israel. The fact that I asked questions, if I may answer, may I answer?
Wasn't an aspersion.
Let's just hold on a minute, Senator Pocock. I've been letting go for quite some time, but it turns out that our colleagues have other questions. So if you can wrap up and we can have a respectful conversation while you wrap up, that would be great.
I'm never not respectful.
I'm just making a broad comment.
Thank you. But I do want to address the comment the Minister has made. I feel deep sorrow this week with the loss of 1,126 lives in this week 2 years ago, and that is a sorrow that has nothing to do with the questions I now ask in relation to the investment of Australians' sovereign fund into weapons that I feel are inappropriate investments. So my question to you, Minister, is if the Future Fund chose to invest in tobacco, which is in no way illegal as an investment category in this country, if it chose to invest in tobacco, would the government have a view? Would it change the mandate to make a request? Because that is not illegal, but I'm interested in whether you believe it is appropriate for the government. It does make it nudges in terms of where it thinks money should go in the three categories that are favoured: infrastructure, housing, and so on. But the government is indicating categories of investment that it favours and it doesn't. So if it chose to invest in tobacco, would not the government take a position on that or not? You think it would be appropriate to invest Australian funds in tobacco industries at a time when our health budget, of course, is dealing with very significant health consequences as a result of tobacco?
Well, I'm personally opposed to, tobacco. I don't smoke myself.
I'm opposed to wine.
Okay, Senator Pocock,
let the Minister
answer.
Carry on.
Opposed to wine.
I won't interrupt.
Okay, well, there we go. Look, I thought I answered that question in my first response to you, but I'll repeat that if it wasn't clear. The government does not and cannot legally direct the Future Fund as to where it invests in particular assets. As I indicated previously, it has a range of investments where it, under its own charter, it can't invest in, and I've outlined that as the previous witness had done so. The government certainly supports the decision of the Future Fund not to invest in tobacco products.
But you have no position in relation to Albert's investment in products that have resulted, for example, in the death of an Australian citizen, an aid worker?
Look, we don't want any deaths as a result of that terrible conflict in the Middle East, and the whole policy of our government and our foreign minister has to do everything we can to encourage the parties to resolve that dispute in a peaceful way. That included a very significant decision in recent weeks to recognise the State of Israel. Sorry, and Palestine,
You meant the State of we've recognised Israel.
Good point, Senator Sharma. What we want to see in the Middle East is an end to the conflict, the existence of two states that live peacefully side by side. I know the Greens would love the conflict to continue and to take advantage.
That is unacceptable.
Senator Pocock,
that is untrue.
Senator Pocock.
There is no valid...
Senator Pocock.
I am deeply offended by that statement.
Yes, indeed, and you can stop shouting now. We are just going to hold on there a minute. I appreciate that Senator Farrell has made a comment that you do not enjoy, and I respect...
Well, it's inaccurate. It's a lie.
It's an opinion.
It is an untruth that I wish the war in the Middle East to continue. I believe the minister should withdraw that statement.
He nominated the Greens party, not your good self, Senator Pocock, but I appreciate you are a member of the Greens party.
The implication is clear, and it should be withdrawn.
Withdraw the comment if the senator's offended by it.
Without conditions.
Thank you,
Minister.
I didn't add any conditions.
He didn't add a condition. Senator Pocock, he didn't add a condition.
Only because I spoke over the top.
No. Did you hear what he said?
He said, I withdraw. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And we'll rotate the call now to Senator Sharma.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Earlier this year, I believe the Australian newspaper put in an FOI request seeking the travel expenditures of the Future Fund, and that request was rejected, I believe, by the Future Fund on the basis that it would be an unreasonable diversion of resources. But that information was then subsequently provided in response to a question on notice lodged by my colleague, Senator Patterson. Could I just understand why did the Future Fund refuse the first FOI request? And what was the basis for that?
Senator, to be clear, we didn't refuse the request. The initial request from the journalist covered, I think, 9 points, which were very broad in nature, and which, as we looked at that, would have generated a very significant diversion of resources to respond to it. And in accordance with the arrangements under the FOI Act and guidelines, we engaged with the applicant to better understand what they were looking, what documents they were looking to access, and how we could assist them to narrow the scope of the request appropriately so that we could process it. We went through that process, and the applicant agreed a new set of questions, to which we responded in full.
Okay, so you're saying that you did end up providing information in response to that to the revised FOI request?
Indeed, in full.
Is it the same information that was provided in response to the question on notice lodged in the Senate?
In parts, it was the same. The FOI request didn't request. The final version of the FOI request that was processed, that the applicant asked us to process, didn't include a request for the travel costs of all staff. We did subsequently provide that in response to a question on notice, and we're happy to do so.
I see. And when did you respond positively to the edited or iterated FOI request? What date was that?
That process ran through July. So I think the initial request came in on the 3rd of July. We negotiated with the applicant during July. And we responded in full. I would have to check the date. If you just bear with me for one moment, I can do that without taking it on notice.
Yeah, of course.
We responded to the applicant on the 7th of August.
And when was the response to the Senate question on notice provided? Do you happen to know that?
Yes, I can get that for you. No, I can't say. It was.
Was it on
the question was asked on the 12th of August. I don't have the date that it was actually tabled.
Okay, I have a feeling it was late August or the 1st of September, according to this news report. Anyway.
We can take that on notice.
Okay. And in the news report that details your response to the question, I'm referring here to an article in the Australian of the 1st of September titled "Frequent Flyers Future Fund Staff Rack Up $4.6 million travel bill in just 1 year." the article asserts that the Future Fund refused to release the bill, this is the travel bill, under freedom of information. So would you dispute that characterisation?
I would characterise it as we went through the process set out in the FOI guidelines to assist the applicant so that we could respond to the request. As I mentioned initially, the initial request was very broad. It expanded across not just travel, but a range of other topics, including in relation to remuneration of staff and manager fees and a variety of other topics. So, you know, we're happy to and do cooperate with applicants to ensure that we can respond to them as best we can. And so that's the process that we went through.
Did you consult with the Minister's office in responding to that FOI request?
No.
Okay. Okay. And then going to the information provided to the question on notice, I understand the total travel expenses, including the board here, and you can please feel free to correct me, were in the order of $4.6 million, including domestic and international. Is that?
I believe that's right.
Accurate? Okay. Just going through your annual report, looks like the total salary bill, including the board's about, well, I only have the 23-24 annual report, but it's about $90 million. Is that in the right?
It's like $90
million.
90.
So I think it was...
Sounds about right.
Sounds about right. So it just seems quite high, 4.6. So if your salary, if your remuneration expenses are 90 million, you're spending 4.6 million on travel, that's sort of 5%. Seems quite high. Is the 4.6 million figure that you spent last year, is that consistent with previous year's spending?
Yeah, we had a look at this. The expenditure on travel as a proportion of the size of the fund is consistent over the last decade, with the exception of the COVID period in 2020, when, of course, travel dropped away quite significantly.
But is the proportion of the size of the fund the correct metric, or is it as a proportion of your operating expenses? I mean, the size of the fund, as you pointed out, has been growing. It's in hundreds of billions of dollars. And I don't actually, you know, the scale-up in effort to manage a fund that's twice as large, I don't think would require twice the level of travel expenses. You're cutting bigger cheques.
I might try to explain why travel is so important to our investment model. So, as you know, we invest over $300 billion in a global portfolio. Something like 3/4 of that is invested offshore. And you'd appreciate it's very important that our staff travel to meet the fund managers we work with, look at the investments we make, do due diligence, maintain relationships and originate investment opportunities. To give you a sense of it, we've got 144 investment managers in 32 locations across 11 countries. And so we have considered over the almost 20 years of the Future Fund whether it would be cost effective or sensible to open up offshore offices like many of our peers do, and many of the super funds here in Australia are opening offices in London and New York in particular. And our view is, firstly, it actually wouldn't save money because salaries are very high and office costs are very high in those locations, and the travel is more efficient. But secondly, we think it would detract from the way we invest, where the whole team's in one place and can debate and challenge each other. So maintaining the relationships with the fund managers in particular is a very important part of our investment model. And as I said in the opening statement, we delivered about $32 billion of profit net of all costs over the last financial year.
Thanks, Dr. Arnold. Look, I don't discount or diminish the importance of some travel, but I'm just trying to understand, because obviously you're government-owned, taxpayer-owned entity, then there are expectations obviously about the discipline that's imposed or exercised around those travel expenses. How does the board review travel expenses? Is there a committee of the board that looks at this and reviews?
We would set an estimated or a budget for travel as part of the annual budgeting process. So the board certainly reviews that and the assumptions that go into that, and then we would track it through the year. It's hard to predict exactly what travel we will do through the course of the year because it's driven by the investment markets and the opportunities and transaction opportunities. So sometimes we need to do unplanned travel on short notice, but we track it against the budget, and for the last few years it's always come in around or under budget.
And the travel for staff, not board members, is that all that travel approved by you as the so the CEO, that's the correct title, isn't it? Does it come to you as the CEO?
Well, there's a hierarchy for approval. So each department has its own budget and its own leadership structure, but a leader would approve all travel, and not just the travel, but that it's in accordance with the Australian Government travel policy. And that so that escalates up the hierarchy. I would review the budgets and the overall strategy and metrics, and then in respect of my travel, that goes to the General Counsel and the Chair.
Okay, that was actually my next question. So your travel policy is consistent with the Australian Government travel policy that I think the Department of Finance enumerates that. Does that include, I mean, I believe, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, domestic travel of, I don't know, less than 2 hours duration is by economy class?
Yeah, actually our policy is all domestic travel in economy class.
Okay. Last question on this. Did you have any? Just last question. I just noticed in response to the question on notice, there were 179 transactions last financial year that were repaid, or 179 items that were repaid for expenses being incorrectly claimed or selected. I don't suggest there was any, malice or ill will there, but it seems rather high, 179. Is that normal for a year? Or have you
we do many tens of thousands of transactions a year, just to put that number in context, but they tend to be very small transactions and mostly accidental, so either someone using the wrong card or one of the more frequent... We tend to use Ubers where it's cheaper than taxis, and one of the more common issues with Ubers is in your single account. You can have your personal account and your work account, and people forget to switch. So we have a process to check that and make sure it's repaid.
Yeah, what is the process to check that? Because I was conscious that obviously not everyone would necessarily be aware that they selected the wrong card. In their account.
The person who's incurring the expense has to check their expenses, obviously, as well, when the statements come, and then the manager would review and approve it, so they would be looking at it, but we've got a separate finance team that has a look at all the expenses line by line and ensures that they're within the policy, and if there's something they consider to be unusual, they would flag that for review.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Arndt and colleagues.
Mr. Chair, Senator, if I may, just to address your question, the question you were asking earlier, I can answer the point about the date of the tabling of the response to the question on notice. Don't have to take it on notice. It is the 1st of September.
Was when you tabled the response to the question on notice. Okay. Thank you. That was all from me, Chair. I don't believe we have any further questions for the future.
Okay.
Future
range of questions from both of us. Is that okay to continue with those?
Yes, of course.
Great, thank you.
There's no more questions from the coalition, so...
Well, at this point, but I'm in the same way that anyone can walk in the door, we could have said you would, So, no, I'm not giving you any guarantees, but we'll give you a rotation and see where we go.
Great.
Are you saying that we're going to Senator Pocock?
Yeah.
And then we'll go to
Senator
Shoebridge after that?
Thank you. I wanted to confirm that the Future Fund has ended its investments in Russian companies. It wound back approximately 200 million invested in Russian companies following their invasion of Ukraine. Is that correct?
Well, we have no exposure to Russian companies, and just to clarify what I mean by that word, I'm sure you'll ask, we own some Russian shares on the Russian stock market, which were part of the index, and the Russian government, we commenced selling some of those when they were sanctioned. The Russian government changed the rules to disallow foreign owners of Russian securities to be able to sell their securities. So technically we still own them.
Okay.
They're valued at zero.
Worthless. Okay. So that is the reason that mechanism came about. The latest Future Fund Periodic Investment Report, which is 30th of June 2025, was just published. The investments in Elbit were worth, at the time, I think, 2.7 million December of last year. That you're nodding, that's correct?
That's approximately right. Yeah. In June, I think, of this year.
2.7 million in December, I have, and then 3.6 million in June of this year, an increase of almost of $1 million in 6 months. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So you issued a responsible investment policy in June also, I understand, and page 6 of that policy states there are grounds for exclusion if an investment is identified as potentially unlawful, and you've already spoken to this, pointing to direct weapons supply of particular kinds. Have you sought any legal advice about the investments in companies that are directly supplying weapons into Israel, surveillance technologies, logistical support, or any form of weapon or supply that's contributing to the genocide we see underway in Gaza?
Senator, so I think the best way I can answer that is to say that the board is comfortable that its policy is appropriate and it's complying with its obligations.
And so there have been discussions directly about the nature of investments in weapons that are being deployed in Israel, in Gaza?
The board is its policy is unchanged. As I mentioned before, the specific investment decision is taken by our external investment managers.
So the Guardians have considered divesting from companies and decided not to. Is that what you're telling me?
No, what I'm saying is that the board has updated its responsible investment policy, which is available on our website, and that policy confirms the approach that we've taken in the past. It expands it in certain areas around broader responsible investment belief and a climate change belief, and puts a framework around our broader approach to responsible investing. But our approach to exclusions is unchanged.
So why are certain weapons controversial and specifically excluded, such as cluster munitions and anti-personnel mines and selected nuclear weapons and biological and so on, that you've mentioned those very particular categories, but others are not unacceptable? On what basis do you make that appalling choice?
So the board, in developing its policy, and as I outlined earlier, bases its exclusions policy on treaties and conventions that the Australian government has ratified. So that provides us and the board with a framework for those decisions.
Thank you. Thanks for your answer, and I'll hand over to my colleague for a few. I've got more though myself.
Just for everyone's awareness, we will be going for a break at 9:45. We had an in-principle agreement of around an hour for the 3 agencies left. If that's going to be renegotiated, we're going to need to do that in the break.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Over to you, Senator Shubridge.
Thanks. It won't be more than an hour.
That's a joke.
Thanks for your attendance. We know, thanks to an FOI done by a great mob in Victoria called Elbit Out of Victoria, that you run every 6 months a review of who you invest in. Is that still your policy, 6-month reviews?
Senator, that is, we run a review of our exclusions in the portfolio every 6 months, and I outlined that earlier this evening.
Yeah. And when was the most recent review?
What month is it now? I think it was in May.
It's October.
It's October. I think it was in May.
Okay. Are you aware that the Norwegian Sovereign Investment Fund, run by Norges Bank Investment Management, issued a statement in August saying they had divested from all Israeli weapons companies, and there's a list of prohibited entities for them to invest in, and that it includes Elbit Systems, one of the largest Israeli weapons companies, because of serious violations of fundamental ethical norms. Were you aware that one of your largest peers globally had made that determination in relation to Elbit?
I think I had seen news of that. The point I would make is that, of course, there are many institutional investors around the world. They have different mandates, different legislative arrangements, different arrangements for considering how they construct their portfolios, how they operate, how they use external managers, and of course how they determine what they will and won't invest into.
Well, last month, a UN Special Commission of Inquiry found that Israel was engaged in an active genocide in Gaza, and Elbit Systems, a company whom, as my colleague has pointed out, you have significant investments in, as an Israeli arms manufacturer, is making record profits out of providing weapons into a genocide. Are you aware of those two facts? That Elbit Systems is making record profits from supplying weapons into the conflict in Gaza, and that the UN Commission of Inquiry found what's happening in Gaza is a genocide. Are you aware of those facts?
I'm aware of those pieces of information. My point would be that the board's policy is to focus its exclusions process on the conventions and treaties that the Australian government has ratified.
One of which is a genocide convention, and we're meant to do everything we possibly can to prevent a genocide, either from occurring or, if one's happening, from continuing. You understand that's a key part of the Genocide Convention?
I'm not close enough to provide you with comment on that particular convention, Senator.
Well, it's not just the UN Special Commission of Inquiry that's raised express concerns about Elbit Systems. The Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Palestinian territories in August of this year said this: since 2023, Elbit Systems has cooperated closely on Israeli military operations, embedding key staff in the military of defence, and has awarded the 2024 Israeli Defence Prize. Elbit Systems and Israel aerospace industries provide a critical domestic supply of weaponry and reinforce Israeli military alliances through arms exports and joint military development and military technology. For Israeli companies such as Elbit Systems and Israel aerospace industries, the ongoing genocide has been a profitable venture. The 65% surge in Israeli military spending from 23 to 24, amounting to $46.5 billion, one of the highest per capita worldwide, generated a sharp surge in their annual profits. That's the situation. And yet you chose, as custodians of Australian public funds in the Future Fund, to actively profit off the genocide, actively profit off the record profits that Elbit is making. And no doubt when you look at the returns, you think, well, that's great. We had a six-fold increase in the Elbit investment. You know, don't worry about it, it's founded in a genocide. How do you justify that?
Senator, I can come back to the board's approach, which is having regard to the treaties and conventions that the Australian government has ratified in relation to economic activities of the companies in which it invests. I would say that, as I talked about earlier, our approach is to consider sanctions that exist in the US and sanctions applied by the Australian government. We consider those exclusions in relation to treaties dealing with economic activities where the Australian government has ratified those. And on that basis, in this particular case, Elbit is not subject to Australian or US sanctions, and it's not excluded under the exclusions framework adopted by the board.
Why on earth do you look only at, for international comparison, US sanctions? Why aren't you looking at Spanish sanctions, Canadian sanctions, Mexican sanctions, Belgian sanctions, Italian sanctions, pretty much all of South America? Why do you only look at the US sanctions?
Senator Shoebridge, Mr. Henson went through the structure of how of the things that are in their remit and in their rules at this point in time. If you have a question that you want to put to him about what are the opportunities to expand, but I'm not sure that the accusatory fashion that you're going in, he has stepped out exactly what the fund's rules are, and maybe you could stick to the structure.
Why only US sanctions? Why not any of the other global sanctions?
The US sanctions regime is one of the dominant regimes in the world. You'd appreciate perhaps that most, if not all, of our external investment managers are global organisations and operating including in the US. And so the application of US sanctions and Australian sanctions gives a very broad range of consideration to those sanctions regimes. Of course, if other sanctions regimes exist that are applicable to those managers, then they'll apply those sanctions regimes.
We'll have to agree to disagree, but I'll hand back to my colleague.
Thank you. I have some more questions. Is that...
Yes, we'll be breaking at 9:45.
Okay, I'll see what I can do in 5 minutes. I want to move on to the question of climate investment, climate-related investment. You recently published your financial year 25 Australian proxy voting and engagement report, and in that report you disclosed that you voted in favour of the climate transition plan for the oil and gas producer Santos. Is that correct?
I don't recall the individual vote, Senator, but I'll take your word for it if it's in the report.
Okay. In light of Australia's commitment to the climate goals of the Paris Agreement and the Future Fund's acknowledgement of climate change as a material financial risk, how can the fund justify supporting this climate transition plan in Santos, which is so egregiously misaligned with the global climate goals?
So as we've discussed before, Senator, the approach we take is to engage with companies to understand their transition plans. We've talked about that before. And we have met with Santos and discussed their transition plan with them and given them our feedback. And it was the view of our team that did that the plan was either sufficiently clear or they had enough feedback from Santos in this case that they could support the report, but you shouldn't necessarily infer from that that means that we're not continuing to put pressure on the company in these meetings to continue to adapt their business to the climate transition.
What's the size of your investment in Santos? Can you give me a ballpark figure?
I can't. I have to take that on notice, but it would be in our portfolio disclosure.
Would you characterise it as a large investment?
Well, yeah. I mean, the companies that we engage with in Australia directly, we would characterise all of those as significant investments.
What was the nature of the feedback that you gave them about their plan?
So I wasn't in the meeting myself, but I have discussed it with our team. Yep. And in essence, the approach we take is that Australia's a signatory to the Paris Treaty, yep, and that the world and the signatories to that treaty are transitioning to a net zero economy by 2050, and so we want to make sure that the companies we invest in, and in this case a fossil fuel producing company, has a plan to transition its business in accordance with that timeframe.
But it is far from aligned with the global climate goals, leaving aside the big question marks that exist over its CCS initiatives. Its transition plans are limping along, they are very inadequate, it's a major fossil fuel producer. How can you, as a fund, very conscious of the risk, as I said before, support a plan that so directly conflicts with our goals as a country?
I mean, having not been in the discussion, all I can say is that our team, who is an expert in this area, was satisfied with the responses from the company in the future plans to support it.
And can you just give me that figure for your Santos investment?
Yes, Senator, the Future Fund had an investment in Santos of $284 million.
Enough to buy you would think, a significant influence in those discussions. Do you believe that is the case?
We would hope so, and that's why we go to the effort to have them.
Do you always send a team to those discussions?
Well, we would always send people from our responsible investment team, and then from time to time other people might join them as well, depending on availability in the topics.
And how do they report what they've said?
Question, Senator Pocock. Sorry? Last question.
How does our team report?
Yeah.
Well, they usually these meetings happen around AGMs or voting, the voting calendar. So there'd usually be a range of issues discussed, and usually the company would be keen to discuss the issues being put to shareholder votes. And so our team would then put together an information paper that includes recommendations on voting from our fund manager. We invest through fund managers and from proxy advisors, and also form their own view, including with input from the discussion and make a recommendation.
Thank you. I'll defer.
Thank you. We're going to break now until 10 p.m. And the committee will determine who is up next. So I will ask the Future Fund to just hold on for a few moments while we work out whether we need you back.
Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, we'll suspend till 10. Welcome back to the Future Fund Management Agency. We will remain on this topic for the next 10 minutes and then we will move to Services Australia for the remainder of the evening. And we will go to Senator Pocock.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity. I've got several last questions, all in relation to climate issues. Page 50 of your annual report, 23-24, says it's, and I quote, strategic engagement program aims to ensure the companies in our portfolio are well governed and prepared to address the ESG challenges and opportunities they face. Woodside, Santos and Whitehaven have been the focus of long-term shareholder pressure over their poor approach to climate risk management, which I know is a concern for you, yet all three companies are still flouting global climate goals by expanding their fossil fuel production. Do you have a tailored engagement strategy in place for these three companies?
Thanks for that question, Senator. The simple answer is yes. I know you're interested in how many meetings we have with these companies, and I thought you might ask, so maybe I'll preempt that and say in the last year we've met with Woodside twice, Santos and Whitehaven once. And in those meetings, among other things, the issue of the climate transition and the strategic thinking about those issues was definitely discussed. You mentioned that the board's published a new responsible investment policy, and one of the four limbs, one of the four pillars of that policy is stewardship. And the way that the board is thinking about enhancing its stewardship program is to be more strategic about how we engage with these companies and hold them to measurable metrics over time. And so that's a work in progress for us.
Can you tell me a bit about those metrics?
Well, they're yet to be developed. So the board has published the policy in June, and we're currently working on the rollout of those things.
So can I just ask you to expand a little about what your thinking is there? Are you thinking about things like objectives around reducing their expansion plans in relation to fossil fuel, or what kind of metrics do you think? Because you must have something in your mind. These are three very large fossil fuel companies.
So I don't think we would direct them on individual investments they make or the capital investments they make in order to run their business. But what we would do is hold them to account to deliver against their transition plans and to ensure their transition plans are consistent with the Paris Agreement that the Australian government signed up to.
And do you write out and communicate your specific objectives and communicate them directly to those companies and their boards?
Well, that's the work in progress. So at the moment we discuss it with them, but we're looking to uplift our focus on stewardship.
Okay. Thank you, and I'll be interested to follow those up into the future. I wanted to go to investor remuneration reports. An article in the AFR reported that the Future Fund had voted against more than 40 companies' remuneration reports in the last year. Is that right?
I believe that's correct, yes.
Does that include ANZ?
I could look it up, but it might take a little while, or I could take it on notice. But it would be in the proxy voting report that's been published on the website.
Perhaps rather than use your time now, I'll proceed with some questions around ANZ, but I would be interested to hear if that is the case, that you have voted down those 40 companies' remuneration reports. Last year, I understand the AGM is coming up for ANZ on the 18th of December. Do you plan to vote against ANZ's remuneration report?
We wouldn't have made that decision yet. So in terms of our voting at AGMs, as I alluded to earlier, we would take advice from our fund managers and our proxy advisors before we form our view, and typically that happens only 3 to 5 days ahead of the vote.
Do you have concerns, or will your vote be affected by the recent very sizable fine, $240 million, the largest corporate fine in Australian history, by ASIC in relation to ANZ's very serious misdemeanours in relation to manipulating the bond, the very large bond placement they did for the Australian government, the fact that they have billed dead people, that they've overcharged people their interest rates, and they have not handled very significant cases of financial damage to their clients. They're all very significant issues that led ASIC to take very significant action. What's your view about ANZ in that light, and do you still hold those investments?
Well, we certainly own ANZ shares. We've discussed at length our exclusions process, and so they're not included in that. We absolutely share your concern about fines, breaches of the law, the very public actions that the regulator's taken in respect of ANZ, and we've raised them directly with the company more than once. And so that's absolutely one of the things that will be taken into account in how we vote.
So you are yet to determine your position, you're concerned about it, you've discussed it with them, but you haven't determined your vote?
Well, we wouldn't normally determine the vote until just before the meeting. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Good luck with that, because what they have done is really quite incredible. I wanted finally, yes, the Fund's annual report for 23-24 states that it sources climate research from independent market providers and leading investment managers, and you made some reference to that earlier tonight. From which specific organisations do you source this research? I think there's a section on that actually in the annual report. I have to look for it. But so I think on page 51 of the annual report, it's got some of the organisations that we work with, the Investor Leadership Network, the ICGN, the ISB, which sets the standards, and the Wellington Climate Leadership Coalition, which is an entity based out of Boston with MIT. And do you use proxy advisors?
For voting?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we do. Well, we take advice from proxy advisors, and then, as I was saying before, our team will form its own view on how to vote using that advice, and also using any input from our investment manager, which manages the shares commercially for us.
And which proxy advisors do you use?
I believe it's one of them is Glass Lewis. I'm just trying to remember what the other one is.
Glass Lewis, you said?
Glass Lewis and Ownership Matters.
And what was the second one?
Ownership Matters.
Ownership Matters. So these are the only two proxy advisors you use?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for all your answers. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening. We appreciate your time. I would now call Services Australia to the table. Do we have Services Australia?
Yeah, they're coming in. There are a lot of officers in the waiting room.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was so struck.
Good evening, Mr Hazelhurst, Chief Executive Officer. Would you care to make an opening statement?
No, thank you, Chair.
Excellent. We will go directly to questions, and we'll start with Senator Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. I have some questions about FOI. The relevant officers might like to come forward.
Certainly, Senator.
So on the 30th of May, I made a fairly standard FOI request for the incoming government brief given to the Minister for Government Services. I was told by your FOI officers, well, they asked whether I could withdraw my request because another applicant had made the same request. I've never encountered that before dealing with another government department or agency. Why was I asked to withdraw a request simply because someone else had made the request?
Senator Randall Brugeot, Chief Operating Officer. So in terms of FOI requests, we would typically provide, if there is a similar identical request, the information once and then have that available on the disclosure log.
I'm glad you said that because that was the second problem. I was then told that once this FOI to someone else was successful, I would then, rather than having just to access it from the disclosure log, download it from the disclosure log, I would have to put in a new request for the copy of the document released to someone else, which would be processed within 7 days. Why should I have to make a request for something that's already been released to someone else and then wait 7 days to receive it?
So, Senator, we received your letter requesting information about how we could improve access to the disclosure log. We are in the final stages of adjusting our process such that all FOI requests that are available on the disclosure log will be available to download from our website. Those which are older than 12 months old will need to be managed through a request process.
I welcome that, thank you, because it is contrary to FOI guidelines, which explicitly state that agencies must make FOI documents immediately available to download unless there's a technical reason why it cannot be uploaded to a disclosure log. And it's completely out of step with every other government department or agency I've dealt with. Treasury, Finance, Home Affairs, PM&C, Foreign Affairs and Trade, AGs, they all just have a log of the files that have been granted access that anyone can download. How long has Services Australia had this approach?
I'm unsure, Senator, as to how long we've had this approach. I can tell you, though, that it will be adjusted such that you'll be able to, and anybody else that wishes to draw from the disclosure log will be able to access that by the end of this calendar year.
Thank you. That's very welcome. What's the reason that Services Australia has had this different approach compared to other agencies?
I don't have the history, Senator. I could take on notice the history and provide more details as to the decisions that may have been made by my predecessors.
That's a good idea. Yeah, if you could take it on notice, I'd appreciate that. And thank you for being responsive to my request. I appreciate that, and I hope that'll promote better transparency for all FOI users with Services Australia, of which I assume you have many.
We do.
I want to move on to a second issue. There was a report in the Herald Sun by Mark Butler and Laura Placella, which is in relation to a Medicare fraud. It was published on the 26th of September. The headline was Medicare fraud allegedly operated from inside the Melbourne Immigration Detention Centre. Are you familiar with that story and that issue?
Yes, I am, Senator. I'll invite another officer to the table to address those questions.
Thank you. While they're coming to the table, just for the benefit of anyone watching from home, the article claimed that Melbourne Immigration Detention Facility inmates have been entangled in a crime ring which allegedly ran a multi-million-dollar Medicare rip-off. Is the article correct?
Senator Chris Burra, the Deputy CEO for Payments and Integrity. Yes, the article is correct that that was a operation that was conducted by the agency.
Okay, thank you. So the article states it's alleged the racket to defraud Medicare was being operated from inside the MIDC. Can you explain the nature of the fraud?
Yes, Senator, I'll start off and then hand over to Mr Timpson, but essentially the fraud entailed the alleged offenders undertaking a range of activity where they were impersonating customers to the agency and impersonating the agency to medical providers in order to essentially trick people into providing their log-on details in order to access the systems to have payments made into bank accounts that they control. During the search warrant execution at the immigration detention facility, there was a number of devices that were recovered which we suspect were involved in the offending, but I'll ask Mr Timpson to now add a bit more detail to that.
Please.
Thank you, Senator. Peter Timpson, General Manager, Fraud Control Investigations. That is an ongoing investigation as part of the Fraud Fusion Task Force and is a joint operation with ourselves and the Australian Federal Police. There are other suspects in relation to this and it is an ongoing investigation, so I'd prefer not to speculate further on more details about the investigation.
Okay, we'll see how I go, and if there are things you can't answer, then I'll accept that. I presume, given that these are people in immigration detention and I understand awaiting deportation, they themselves were presumably not entitled to Medicare. They didn't have their own Medicare numbers that they were accessing.
That's correct, Senator. What they were doing was, by its very definition, allegations of fraud involve what we believe are people seeking to get a financial benefit to which they were not entitled to.
Yeah. Yeah, so they were trying to get other people's Medicare benefits. Do you have a expected or rough total of how much they defrauded?
Okay. Well, to date, we've calculated at approximately $8 million.
8 million, did you say?
Yeah, but it's an ongoing investigation.
So it's possible that number will rise further?
As I said, there's other suspects in the investigation. We prefer not to speculate any further, as
Sure.
this is a joint operation with the Australian Federal Police.
Sure, I do understand that. Can you tell me, and I'll accept if you can't, whether the other suspects are also in immigration detention or whether they are in the community?
I prefer not to comment on that at this point in time, Senator.
Has it been... How many victims so far have been identified?
Well, we're still undertaking those investigations, Senator, and one of the aspects that we're looking at is sort of the range of activities that might have been involved, and so we wouldn't want to speculate at this point in time, Senator.
Can you say whether or not it was individuals who suffered financial loss, or was it just the taxpayer that was effectively defrauded?
Well, ultimately, it is, of course, the taxpayer, but one thing that we're very aware of in the agency in terms of scams and fraud activity in the broad, and it's not limited to this activity or this operation, is that what we see is that people have their identities impersonated, accounts sort of accessed, and that creates a range of inconveniences and other issues for them. And so without getting into the specifics of this matter, then it does have an impact on individuals in terms of how they can interact with the agency, as well as, of course, financial consequences for the taxpayer.
And potential identity theft for the individuals if you can use these credentials to try and take out a loan or a credit card or something?
In the broad, what we see with the scam activity that we see, and there's sort of thousands of scam activities and websites and SMS messages I think most people would have received at some point in time, is that they are seeking to essentially harvest credentials and personal information. We know that from major sort of third-party data breaches by corporate entities and the like, that there is personal information available for sale on the dark web, and that criminals access it that way. And you're right, Senator, that what that enables offenders to do is to build a picture where they can essentially impersonate somebody to the extent of taking over their identity and then using those credentials in a wide range of ways to seek financial benefits that they're not entitled to.
Has it been possible to recover any of the funds so far, or are you anticipating you'll recover any of the funds?
Some of the funds have been recovered, have been frozen.
In the suspects' bank accounts, or is it?
In bank accounts, yes.
Yeah.
But again, Senator, we wouldn't want to go too far in that because we're still undertaking some of the forensics and the accounting.
Yeah, I'm respectful of that. I don't want to push you in a way that would compromise an investigation. You said as part of the warrant execution that a number of devices were found in the detention centre. Did I hear that right?
That's correct.
Can you say how many?
I prefer not to comment on how many because there is further operational activity to occur.
Yeah. Is it concerning to you that it's possible to run a sophisticated multi-million-dollar Medicare fraud from within a detention centre?
Oh, Senator, that would be a question for the Department of Home Affairs.
As you may know, whether or not inmates in immigration detention should have access to devices is a contentious, long-running public policy issue. The previous government tried on multiple occasions to legislate to give detention centres the power to ban it. And last year, the current government subsequently revised their position and agreed and passed a bill which allowed that to happen. So obviously the Melbourne Immigration Detention Centre had not used those powers to ban devices, or is it part of the investigation that those devices were smuggled in? Or
Senator, it's not our role to be speculating or commenting on the operations of another department.
Fair enough, fair enough. What steps has your agency taken to try and prevent this from happening again?
Well, Senator, we're undertaking a range of measures to increase the security of our online accounts in particular. We're also undertaking a number of other steps to strengthen platforms such as MyGov and the digital online services that we offer. The very first and most obvious line of defence is for people to be careful about the prevalence of scam activity in society, to protect their own personal information, and we have a range of educational information that's available on the Services Australia website about steps that ordinary Australians can take to protect their personal information. We're also undertaking a range of measures to improve the security of MyGov and the log-on accounts, and an important step there is steps that we've taken to build a security dashboard so that people can see what sort of security settings they currently have on their accounts and how they can strengthen it. There's also pass keys, which we know are far more protective of people's accounts than standard or sort of old-fashioned secret questions and answers, which these credential harvesters go after. And we're also taking a range of measures to implement improved sort of capabilities within the agency to detect where it is that we think somebody is not who they're purporting to be and that they're impersonating a genuine customer.
Just quickly, can you tell me a bit more about that last one? Thank you, fair enough. In my previous slides, I had the cybersecurity portfolio, and I'd love to think we could educate our way out of this problem, but there's no way we're going to make every Australian a cybersecurity expert. So probably the most fruitful thing will be people like you who control the flow of lots of money, improving your systems. So just expand on that last point.
Yeah, I'll ask Mr Timpson to add about the particular measure we've got there, but I would add, Sandy, you mentioned sort of cyber security. It is, just to be clear, not sort of, often media use terms like cyber attack or hacking. It's actually people inadvertently and being tricked into providing their own information, essentially giving somebody the key to the door.
Correct.
But I'll hand over to Mr Timpson. Thanks.
So we have a range of options, Senator, in relation to how we detect different measures, and obviously with the education piece is the first line of defence, but also we have systems in place where we have, when claims are made, where we use a system called machine learning, which will detect anomalies. So not going into too many specifics in this forum because scammers would listen to this and learn from what we do, but from what we set, there are tripwires that indicate to us that something's not right, and then that is then referred to one of our analysts, and then they can stop or reset or contact customers in that space, or they directly contact us as well through our safe help desks. So we have a large number of calls every year in that, and what we say, remediate and solve the problem. But that can take, as you'd appreciate, anything from 15 minutes to 2 hours, depending on who we're dealing with in the community. Noting that scammers directly target certain sectors of the community and prey on very vulnerable people in vulnerable situations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, if I may. In the interest of time, I know you want to move on, Chair.
No, of course.
We are seeing some... You're right, Senator. We won't just educate our way out of addressing these scams, but we are seeing some pleasing results in relation to the activities we're undertaking, most of which are about encouraging people to use different ways of authenticating themselves.
Yeah.
Happy to provide on notice some examples of that and the results that we're getting, because we are making some progress, and it's largely because people are getting used to, including with their bank or their insurance company, things like multi-factor authentication, including for when you're updating your details, because a lot of the scams depend on someone getting in and updating your bank account to their bank account. Yeah. And so there's a range of things that we've done to, in effect, stop that being able to happen. But we could provide some more detail on that.
Thank you. That'd be great.
That would be very helpful, I think, for everyone. Thank you very much. We'll go to Senator Allman-Payne. 10 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chair. I've got a few questions, so I'll do my best to see how many we can get through. Nice to see you, Mr Hazelhurst, and thanks for all being here really late. My first lot of questions relate to the role that Services Australia plays in relation to payment cancellations and suspensions around mutual obligations and the targeted compliance framework. My first question is, when an employment service provider makes the decision to suspend a job seeker's payment as a result of a mutual obligation or work refusal failure, does Services Australia play any role in that, or is it entirely based on the decision of the employment service provider?
I've been joined by some colleagues, Senator, who will be able to help you with an answer to that question.
And I'm conscious I've only got 10 minutes in my first go and we're running short of time.
Senator Stuart Turnbull, Acting Deputy CEO, Program Design Group. Payment suspensions under the targeted compliance framework are dealt with between DWER and providers.
Yep.
So that's where the decisions are made.
And so Services Australia doesn't play any role in those at all?
The only role we would have is once a decision has been made on a payment suspension, we are the entity that makes the payment. So we would delay the payment based on the decision to suspend the payment.
Okay, and does that happen by just something getting input into the system at the employment service? Is it automated? Does a person actually do it? How does that work?
That would be, with that decision having been made by DWER or the providers, that would then be in their IT system, which would trigger our IT system in regard to the payment.
Okay. What about when Services Australia applies a suspension when notified by a CDP provider? Is it a similar process except that the CDP provider makes a decision, or is Services Australia making the decision?
I'd have to take that one on notice, Senator.
Yep, no, that's fine. Does Services Australia hold information in its systems that would allow it to assess whether a payment suspension decision was unfair or unlawful?
I don't think so, Senator. I think that the details of that decision, as I said, are held by providers, and DWER would have access to that. So those decision-making processes, I don't think that we're privy to that level of information.
Okay. I'm happy for you to take it on notice if you need to confirm.
Thanks, Stuart. So, Lee Allison, Acting General Manager, Families and Participation. There is some information that we may apply to a customer's record in regards to information that we might find out around a temporary incapacity or some other type of vulnerability that might then provide an exemption to that customer for their mutual obligations for a period of time, and that would then, if you like, override or prevent the suspension from occurring. So there are some situations like that.
Okay. So you would have information about vulnerabilities, but not information about why a suspension has been provided. Is that?
That's
am I
correct.
understanding that correctly? Okay. So I guess my question then is, how does Services Australia review those decisions when challenged by a person who's activity tested, or do they not come to you at all if they're challenged?
Look, our main role in terms of review is around mutual obligation failures.
Yep.
So that's where we get involved to assess whether there's a reasonable excuse, and this is when people are in the penalty zone.
Mm-hmm.
So where an additional mutual obligation failure could lead to payment cancellation. This is when the framework's operating as intended, as opposed to when elements are paused like now. But yeah, that's when we would get involved. They're in the penalty zone and there's a mutual obligation failure, and that's where our staff would undertake a compliance investigation to see whether there was a reasonable excuse for that mutual obligation failure. If there was a reasonable excuse, then it wouldn't trigger. This, again, when it's operating as intended, it wouldn't trigger a cancellation.
So just on that, so when the suspension is applied, you don't have information around that because the job service provider is doing that. So when it gets to the point where it's a cancellation, are you then getting additional information from the service provider, or is the decision just being based on the information, I guess, in that target TCF computer system that comes across to say they're in the penalty zone?
I think we'd have to take that on notice, Senator, to give you a proper answer to that one.
Really keen to understand that. So that'd be great. So in terms of the decisions that are being made by Services Australia that are in its purview, what decisions are currently paused?
So essentially, Senator, all decisions to either cancel a payment or to reduce a payment are paused at the moment. And I think the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations has put out quite a detailed listing up on it.
So all cancellations right now are paused?
Correct.
Okay. I was going to ask you why have suspensions not been paused, but I imagine you're going to tell me to ask Dewar.
Absolutely. That's
Okay. Do you know how many ART decisions have been made relating to unlawful decisions this year?
No, I'd have to take that on notice.
If you could take that on notice, that'd be really helpful. And how many ART decisions about unlawful decisions were settled prior to reaching an ART decision? If I could get that on notice, that would be great. Next questions relate to compulsory income management, and I think I can ask them to you, but let me know if I'm straying into DSS questions. Are you able to tell me how many people are currently subject to compulsory income management?
Senator, I'll just wait for my other colleague to come.
Hi, Ms Toes.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thanks.
So while Ms Toes is looking that up, I have information here that says in terms of enhanced income management, as at 19 September 2025, there were 22,738 customers, and at the same date, there were 9,754 customers on income management.
And income management is the voluntary one and enhanced is compulsory, or have I got it round the wrong way?
Income management is the original program, and then that transitioned to enhanced income management.
So which one's compulsory and which one isn't?
Senator Kathy Toes, General Manager, Communities Division. There are elements of compulsory income management in both.
Okay.
Yes.
So what I'm keen to know, and I'm happy to take it on notice if necessary, the breakdown between compulsory versus voluntary in those numbers. And if I could also get a breakdown broken down by Indigenous status as well, so how many First Nations people are on compulsory versus on voluntary. Actually, I might ask you for these couple on notice as well. If I could get how many people on compulsory income management have applied for an exemption, temporary or permanent, from income management over the past 12 months, And of that group, how many have successfully obtained an exemption during that period?
Happy to take that on notice.
Next question on compulsory income management or income management. We're moving into a bushfire season and flooding for different parts of the country, or bushfire and flooding seasons. Extended outages of telecommunication services such as FPOS lead to many people subject to income management unable to purchase basics at local stores due to all their money being trapped on their smart cards or whatever their card happens to be called. Has Services Australia undertaken any analysis on the impact of natural disasters on people subject to compulsory income management?
Thanks, Senator. I am not aware about specifics in terms of natural disasters, but I can tell you that we look very closely at business continuity across the board in terms of people being able to access money on their basics card as well as on their smart card. So within the basics card functionality on the original income management program, if somebody is at a local store approved to use that card and the terminal's not working, for example, there is provision for the agency to actually make that payment to the store for those goods and the person to take their goods.
And does that happen immediately? Like, how does that actually work in practice?
In practice, it's a really smooth process between the store and the agency to reimburse the store from the person's account when that happens.
And so if you had an extended outage, say, for example, due to a bushfire or a flood, is that process still able to be accessed?
Yes, that process would be able to be accessed.
And do we have examples of where that's happened during natural disasters?
I would have to take that on notice.
If you could, because I guess noting that they're becoming more frequent, very keen to understand what work's been done in that space.
We can provide you the arrangements on the business continuity, including in natural disasters, for the cards.
There might also be some value in teasing that out a bit with NEMA, because of course, actually, if in that event no one is accessing anything through their cards, it's not just those people on income management. So the contingency arrangements that would be in place in those sorts of events would be something that would have a broader application too.
Getting that info would be great. Now, my next lot of questions relate to the consultations that were completed in December 2024 in relation to the future.
I might just rotate because we are on a short timeline, so we just make sure everyone's getting it.
Though, if these questions,
absolutely.
So, should I be asking Services Australia about questions around those consultations, or is that a DSS question?
It's a DSS question around
future
income management.
We will rotate the call and we'll come back to you. We will go to Senator Patterson.
Thank you, Chair. This is just a series of requests for data, if you're able to table it, and if not, if you could take on notice, that you've previously provided in hearings like this. So, for example, in November 2024, you provided a table of customer demand for financial years 2019-20 to 23-24. Do you have the same table updated for 24-25?
Wait for another colleague, Senator. In advance of previous hearings, we've also received previously questions in advance and then tabled those on the day. We didn't receive that.
If for that reason you're not prepared to table them tonight, I won't hold it against you. But if you could take it on notice and provide it subsequently, that would be appreciated.
Okay, my colleagues have come to the table, but the short answer is we don't have that information here today.
But you're able to take it on notice?
We'll take that on notice.
Thank you. In July 2024, in response to questions from Senator Kovacic, you provided a detailed breakdown of social security and welfare claims processing from 1 July 2018 to 21 July 2024. Can you update those figures?
Bo Robertson, Acting Deputy CEO of Customer Service Delivery Group. We don't have the data going all the way back to 2019 today, but we can absolutely take that on notice.
Thank you. In December 2024, you provided in writing to then Senator Hughes a detailed table of the 2023-24 financial year Social Security and Welfare Claims average days to process. Do you have an updated table for the previous financial year?
We have, for average days to process, we've got for the 23-24 and 24-25 financial year, we do have.
Great. It's the 24-25 one that I'll be seeking on notice, please.
Yes.
In July 24, you provided Senator Hughes an 18-page table on Social Security and Welfare Claims financial year data from 1 July 2018 to 21 July 2024. Can you provide an updated version of that?
We'll take that on notice.
Thank you. Also in July 24, you provided, again, Senator Hughes, details of how many customers abandoned their visit to a service centre and what was the average time to abandon a visit in the 23-24 financial year. Can you give me the updated ones for 24-25?
Yes, I can give you today. No, we'll take that one on notice. Thank you, Senator.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
You've also previously provided Services Australia telephony reports for the years 2021-22 and 22-23. And do you have those for subsequent years?
I've got 22-23 and 23-24.
Okay, but not 24-25?
Sorry, and I have 24-25. I've got average speed to answer, calls handled.
Great. On notice, if you could provide those documents, that would be helpful.
Yes.
This is going to be a hard question to answer given the volume of data I just asked you for, but when I do receive that information, generally speaking, what are the trends? Do they show improvements? Are we going backwards? Are we going forwards? What are the trends?
Well, I can tell you trends between last financial year and the year before. So for overall, our demand has reduced. Predominantly, that's been impacted by a significant reduction in the amount of congestion messages that have been played last financial year compared to the financial year previously. So
explain that to me as a new person in the portfolio space. What's that mean?
Yeah, so for in the Centrelink space predominantly, when we have periods of very high demand and not enough resources to manage that demand, then in some instances when certain parameters are met, in the telephony channel, customers would hear a congestion message which ultimately says, we're busy, we can't answer your call right now, can you call back? So the number of those messages that we played in the 24-25 financial year reduced by 85%.
Compared to the previous one?
Compared to the previous.
What was the policy change or technological change that achieved that?
It's a staffing change.
Right.
So, a number of factors. So we had a significant increase in staffing from November 2023 that allowed us to get on top of our processing, which meant that less customers were contacting us to say, can you please give me an update on where my claim is at?
Understood. Okay. Thank you. Well, I'll look forward to the rest of those details on notice. And Chair, I am mindful of the time and other senators, so I'm happy to rotate the call there if that's helpful.
Thank you very much, Senator Patterson. We'll go to one really quick question from Senator Whittaker.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question is relating to Indigenous service officers. So I'm just wondering if you can, I might just combine a couple of my questions into one brief question. Specifically, what do Indigenous service officers do to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander customers accessing services, and whereabouts are they based across the country?
Thanks, Senator. We have actually this year we celebrated over 50 years of Indigenous service officers, or ISOs we like to call them. So they play a really pivotal role in helping us strengthen the cultural connection between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and the essential services that we deliver in Services Australia. At the moment, or as at the 30th of June, we had 68 ISOs spread across the country, and those ISOs are embedded in remote servicing teams and in service centres all across the country. We've got 19 ISOs across New South Wales and the ACT. We've got 8 ISOs in the Northern Territory, 22 in Queensland, 4 in South Australia, 2 in Tasmania, 6 in Victoria and 7 in Western Australia. The other important element of an ISO is they actually help to support staff with training and cultural competency. They provide a really strong connection, and they foster long-term relationships with local organisations, elders, customers, and ensure services are respectful and responsive. They also help the agency support the Closing the Gap initiatives.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. We will go to Senator Roberts.
Thank you all for attending tonight. How many applications for redress were received by the scheme for COVID vaccine redress scheme before the closing down date? I'll repeat the question.
No, Senator Stuart Turnbull, Acting Deputy CEO, Program Design Group. I've got it. So we received 4,962 claims by the closing date.
4,962. Thank you. How many were successful?
To date, 522 claims have been paid to the value of 50.9 million.
50.9 million total?
Yep.
Thank you. How many applications were refused? The rest of them? Or some partially paid? Or?
So, of the remaining, 2,670 were not payable, 1,048 were withdrawn, and there are 722 claims at different parts of the assessment process.
What was the most, thank you, what was the most common reason for being refused?
Senator, we assess each claim against the criteria. For example, the different vaccines that are eligible, the different conditions.
You're all COVID?
Yep. So I'd have to check what the most common reason is, Senator.
You take that on notice?
Sure.
Please. Thank you. One of the criteria to be satisfied apparently is that the applicant needed to be hospitalised. Is that correct?
I believe so, Senator, yes.
Why is that?
Senator, we don't set the policy, Senator. I think if you're asking about the particular policy parameters of the scheme, I think that those questions are better directed to the Department of Health, Disability and Ageing. They set the policy parameters and they'll have their rationale for that. Our role is to then administer the payment against the criteria that they set.
So, Senator Roberts, this session is really just the service delivery aspects.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How many complaints have been made about claims being rejected? Appeals, I guess.
I think we would need to take that on notice. What I could tell you, Senator, is that we do have a review process. For example, at the moment we have 144 claims that are undergoing a review of the decision. And the agency has also finalised 161 review decisions as well. So that gives an indication of the total number, having received the assessment, who...
The agency has reviewed them? They've already reviewed them?
There are 144 that have been reviewed, and there are 161 where the review process has been finalised.
Has been?
Finalised.
Thank you. How many applications are still being processed?
There are 722 applications still being processed. They're at different stages of that assessment process. Of the 722, there are 221 with Services Australia at the moment for assessment. There are 344 claims where we are requesting further information from the applicant to support the claim. There are 103 claims with an expert panel. Now, that's either an expert medical panel or an expert legal panel. And there's another group which is 54 claims where we've made an offer and the applicant has 6 months to decide whether or not to accept that offer. So that's the breakup of the 722 on hand.
Thank you. What is
And
the
I'll
average
get you to
pay-
wrap up, Senator Roberts.
Okay, what's the average payout that's been made and how are payouts calculated?
I don't have the average payout with me. We would need to take that on notice. Payouts are calculated based on a range of categories of loss. For example, specified out-of-pocket expenses, lost earnings, paid and gratuitous care, loss of capacity to provide domestic services, pain and suffering, and there are also lump sum payments for claims involving death.
Last question, very simple. Why are the Office of Compensation so small, taking into account proof of the significant damage that complainants suffered, including some crippled for life, debilitated for life?
Senator, I think that's best directed to the Department of Health, that particular question, because it relates back to the policy.
Directed to who?
The Department of Health,
Okay.
Disability and Ageing.
Because they
set the
guidelines.
parameters.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Almond Payne.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just got a couple of questions around FOI. In a recent submission on the Freedom of Information Bill, I understand that Services Australia has said that 95% of their Freedom of Information requests are for personal information. Is there a genuine need for people to submit an FOI to access their own information?
Thank you, Senator. As you would be aware, there is a proposed amendment to the FOI bill which is being led through Attorney Generals. Services Australia has provided a submission to that to provide a view as to how we would support providing easier access to information via FOI. And questions in relation to the bill would need to be directed to Attorney Generals.
No, but my question is there a genuine need for people to submit FOIs to access their own information from Services Australia?
Now, Senator, we follow the standard rules in terms of access to information. We are making that as easy as possible, and we are working within the guidelines that are set by government.
Okay. How should people access their own information that Services Australia holds on them if they don't have sufficient ID? What do they do?
So, Senator, it is possible for customers to access facilitated access to their records by visiting service centres, and there's our ability to be able to support low document customers. Now, this is beyond my role. Others will be able to answer in terms of the service delivery aspect, how we support customers to access information. But once customers are able to prove their identity, they are able to access a broad range of their own personal information using either our systems or services.
Can they access the entirety of their file?
I'm unsure, Senator, as to the extent of access. There will be...
is there someone else here who can answer that question?
We might take on notice.
It's a general question. If I have a file with Services Australia and I ask you for my entirety of my file, can I get it, or do I have to go through an FOI process to get everything you have on me?
There may be certain internal information that we hold on a customer that may not be accessible, but I would be speculating it would be best if we took on notice.
Senator, what we can say is there is no single file for a person, because they'll have applied for different things over time, and of course it could be that they have business with different parts of us, Medicare, Centrelink, etc. If a person wants to get the full all the records of their interactions with us through an FOI request, they can do that, and it's very rare. In fact, I don't think we ever charge people who are asking for that. So there's not a financial barrier for people who want to see all of their records. But because of the history of the organisation and the fact that it's made up of those 3 big master programs, there's not one single place where we have all the information on a person's interactions with the different parts of the organisation. So we have to construct that.
If I wanted just all of the information, say, from my Centrelink file, in terms of my interactions with my job service providers, so just in relation to that, and job seeker, for example, could I get all of that, or would I have to go through an FOI process?
I think let's take that on notice. But in general, in order for us to provide that to a person, regardless of whether it's through FOI or through some other arrangement, we have to assemble that information. It's not something we can just print out.
Yeah, I understand that part. So yes, if I could get on notice the processes that people have to go and when they have to use an FOI process and when they can just get the information.
We can do that.
Thank you. I'll leave it there. I'll put the rest on notice.
Fantastic. That actually concludes today's hearing. I won't be the only one excited for the 5-minute reprieve.
Six.
Well, not by the time I've finished talking, be 5. I would like to thank everyone who's appeared before us today. I'd particularly like to thank Hansard and Broadcasting and our Secretariat for the amazing job they do, to the Minister, the Honourable Don Farrell, and Minister Penny Wong, who was with us earlier today. Thank you. And we will now declare this meeting of the Senate Finance and Public Administration Legislation Committee adjourned.